So the Shiites don't all believe this, but some Shiites do, and Ahmadinejad certainly does. The Sunnis don't, and they're horrified by the prospect of a nuclear Iran. So anyway, so that's what he wanted to come and sit down and talk about. First of all, how to build bridges between evangelicals and Sunni Muslims, and also about Ahmadinejad's end of the world rhetoric and theology, his eschatology. And then he asked me, well, walk me through, what does the Bible say about the end times? Now, again, Dayenu, right? That's, if we were doing all this and getting these books out there and having these conversations and doing all the media, I mean, CNN had me on, and they said, Joel, the anchor, Kira Phillips, I think it was, said, Joel, and I was on with Jerry Jenkins. So imagine the two of us sitting there, and she's like, do you believe that we're living in the last days before the return of Jesus? What with this war going on in Israel and Lebanon, and what are the signs? What should we be watching for? And I thought, this isn't Moody Broadcasting. This isn't the 700 Club. This is CNN. And yet these type of questions have happened over and over again on all these shows. MSNBC, by the way, mocked CNN for having me on to talk about the apocalypse and the end of the world, and then proceeded to have me on 4 times over the next 2 weeks. So I don't know. But people are interested in this stuff, And Dayenu, any of that would have been enough. Then we had the privilege of being invited. I was invited to hear the speech by the Iraqi Prime Minister, Maliki. He was invited to address a joint session of Congress a couple months ago, I guess it was. And so I went to the speech. It was, obviously in Congress, and it was really quite remarkable. The first speech by a democratically elected leader of Iraq to the American government in history. And for all the challenges that are going on in Iraq, it really is quite extraordinary how hard they're working to get this thing up and running. And we know, scripturally, Iraq has to get peaceful and quiet to get as prosperous as Revelation talks about. At some point, this thing calms down. I can't tell you when, but we know from Revelation 18 that when Babylon falls, well, Babylon has to have risen first. And when Babylon is wealthy and is excessive, excessive luxuries that is described in the book of Revelation, to get from here to there, things have to calm down. They have to quiet down, so that when all the merchants of the world are watching Babylon collapse and they're weeping because all the commerce that's being lost. Believe me, not all the merchants of the world could care less right now about what's happening in Iraq. But we know that eventually that will happen, and we're starting to see signs of that. But all that to say, going to the speech, Dayenu, that was fascinating to watch. But then Edward and I were at lunch with somebody, and I got a phone call, and the person said that a senior advisor to the prime minister has heard about your books. He hasn't read them, but he hears that you're telling the future through these books, and about countries in the Middle East. And would you have breakfast with him tomorrow morning and talk to him about the situation in Iraq? So I was like, no, I don't think, no, okay, sure, that would be an honor. So we went and we had breakfast with the senior advisor to the prime minister, and we gave him a copy of the Copper Scroll. Well, or it was Ezekiel option. Or maybe it was both. It's fogging a little bit now. But anyway, we gave him copies of the books and just began to listen to him as he described how he's been almost assassinated numerous times, how his 2 sons have been killed, how he is one of the only Iraqi leaders who's ever been to Israel. He's actually been to Israel twice. And he believes that the future of the Middle East involves an Iraqi-Israeli peace treaty and an alliance against the Shiite forces, the radicals in Iran and elsewhere, which I thought was interesting just in a biblical context, that we may actually see an Iraqi-Israeli peace treaty. We may not see it ourselves, but one can expect something like that to happen at some point. And just to sit with him and then talk to him about these prophecies of what the Bible says about the future of Iraq. And this is just happening over and over again, and we're kind of amazed. I mean, we pray for God to open up doors for us to be able to talk about Christ, whether it's on media outlets that allow us to talk to millions, or or just sitting with one person who now is taking these books and, more importantly, these ideas about what God says about the future of Iraq and how much God loves Iraq and loves the Iraqi people and wants and has a wonderful plan for their lives, and wants to help Iraq find peace. And now he's going back to be an advisor to the prime minister, as he's already been doing. But if we were to fly into Iraq, I do want to do that, but I have not found the right person to get us in yet. But you can't just go up to the green zone. Yeah, I'd like you to let us in so we can talk to one of the senior advisors to the prime minister about the biblical future of Iraq. We were having dinner with a friend the other day he's the top Iraq official at the State Department, advising the secretary, and he had just been in Iraq when President Bush was there. And he'd been there for a while and was involved in capturing Zarqawi, or killing him. Actually, they were going to capture him, but they ended up killing him. But what was fascinating, just to hear the stories about what's going on inside and the security around the green zone. And then President Bush was so grateful to him and to his team, and he leads this team, for his work there, that he said, look, I fly out, in a few minutes on Air Force One. Why don't you come back to the United States with me? So the guy's like, okay. And so they're in the green zone, which is this highly fortified, compound in the middle of Baghdad. And they lift off in this series of this convoy of Black Hawk helicopters with these guys with machine guns waiting to blow away everything that they see, if need be. And they lift off, and about 50 feet above the rooftops, they start literally driving down streets at high speeds to get to the airport, to land just in time to basically throw everybody in the back of Air Force One. And then Air Force One takes off and it basically has these jet thrusters that basically take you straight up, essentially. And and this guy is like, oh man, this is so cool. But he was sitting in a seat across from Tony Snow, the new press secretary, and Tony's seat was facing the front of the plane. And this guy, our friend, was sitting the other way. And he said, you may want to tighten that seatbelt a bit, because the plane goes off and his face is down in his lap, and he can't even eat those little M&Ms with the White House seal on them. I mean, they're just going straight up. But we had a wonderful conversation that night with him, gave him a copy of Epicenter. And I mean, these books are kind of getting their way into the awareness as well as the hearts of a lot of people, whether they're Muslims, whether they're Israeli leaders that we had a guy call us, a friend of ours who's an Israeli official. He called us and said, hey, can we have lunch? We just sat down and had lunch with him, and we were talking about the books and talking about, and the conversation really got to Jesus. And he was talking about how in college, when people would come to his floor to try to, like Campus Crusade for Christ, students or whatever, and everybody on the floor, if Christians came along trying to share the gospel, they would say, well, go to this guy because he's like the floor rabbi. And if you can lead him to Jesus, then we'll all come to Jesus. And it was interesting because we were just having this conversation with this guy, and he said, the thing is, a lot of Jewish people are offended when people share their faith in Jesus with us. But I figure, if you really believe this to be true, I would be offended if you weren't trying to tell me. And I wanted to, TiVo that moment for a second, just sort of freeze frame it and lean over to Edward and go, did he just basically ask us to talk to him about Jesus? And that's the way it felt. And so it's just amazing the way God is opening these doors. And I really do believe it's for several reasons. One, because of all the war and rumors of wars in the Middle East, there's so much turmoil, so much tension and anxiety that people really are anxious about the future, and they want to have some sense of what's coming, and they want to know, is the Bible relevant at all? And is the Bible relevant to the Middle East? And are you saying that the Bible has essentially advanced intelligence on what's coming that helps us to prepare, helps us to think through the scenarios that are coming? And I think that's a big part of why these books are working, why they're connecting with people. Again, not just exciting at the macro level in terms of the numbers and stuff. But far more interesting to us, the pathways that they're taking and getting into the hearts and minds of people that we wouldn't normally have a chance to meet, and that are triggering questions that seem to back up this assessment that I'm making, that people at the highest levels of government all around the world are interested. It's not set yet, but we've been invited to have dinner with the president of the Philippines, and it was supposed to happen a couple weeks ago, right before this tour. In fact, they basically said, could you get on a plane? It takes 2 days to get here, and then basically arrive in time for dinner, have dinner, and then we want you to speak at this little private dinner about the end times. Make sure to share the gospel. Be the president and her top advisors, and then we'll put you on a plane and you can get back to Portland to begin your tour. We actually did consider this, but by the grace of God, the president couldn't make it on that particular night, and it didn't work. So we may be going in December. But I'm saying this because I want to say thank you for your prayers and for your efforts, because this is really, it's amazing, and there's no way to explain it. Okay, yeah, I worked for some political leaders. But I remember, when Becky says so nicely, he ran a presidential campaign. First of all, I was the number 2. But secondly, the campaign lost, okay? And I helped it lose twice. So it's not like, let's not overstate my impact on the world, So I'm just saying. And when people talk about these books, I'm so excited that people like them and they're connecting with them. But remember, it's not Steinbeck, it's not Dickens. These aren't like the greatest books that ever were made. I'm grateful for the opportunity to write them, although Jeremy Taylor has made them far better than they ever would have been. But I remind you that the Washington Post called The Last Jihad an act of terrorism against the reader's brain. Okay, so not everybody is enjoying these. Okay, but But think of it as like your loaves and fishes. For me, for Lynn and myself and our boys, we feel like these are our loaves and fishes. It's not like, it doesn't matter that they're not the greatest literature that ever happened. They're as good as we can make them. We're learning, but there's a lot of prayer into them, and Jesus is blessing them. And when he blesses something, even small, he multiplies it, and he feeds a lot of people. And that's what's just totally amazing to us. It shouldn't be. We believe it on the text. We believe it when we read the Bible of Jesus doing these things. But when you see the prayers of people take something simple and multiply its effect, you are watching God do something beyond your own abilities. He's opening doors that couldn't be opened, and he's opening them for the gospel. And, we think really of, when I first studied the scriptures, I said this a few years ago when your father was alive, and it was such an honor to meet him before he passed, because the first Bible that I ever had that I studied, the first Bible I actually had was a New Testament with Psalms and Proverbs in the back, and I was in a Sunday school class where they used to do those sword drills where you forced, did you have the opportunity to do those? I was always losing, but I wanted to win that wiffle ball bat, that if you won the sword drills, so again, I had the Psalms, the New Testament was Psalms and Proverbs, and then one day they said, all right, last book of the Bible, Proverbs, well, that's what the class did, and I was like, hey, whoa, yo, right there, people. So I didn't really read that one, obviously, too much. But the one that I got in 3rd grade was the Living Bible, was the way. And I remember the first book of the Bible I ever began to devour, once God really captured my heart, was the book of Ephesians. And I remember in chapter 3, right at the end, and the way I remember the translation was that God is able to do immeasurably more than we can hope for, dream of, or imagine. And that's true. That's the God we serve. He takes a little, and he makes it a lot. He takes nothing, and he turns it into something. And what we're trying to do is take what little we accomplished over 10 or 11 years in politics and say, Lord, all right, we have this political background. You're obviously not calling us to work in the White House or wherever else it's going to be. But take this, what experience we have, and stitch it together in a new way. Do something new, we pray. And use this so that in some way we can impact people with the gospel. And this is really what compels my wife and kids and I. We look at the prophecies of Ezekiel 38 and 39. We look at Russia and Iran now forming an alliance for the first time in human history. We look at Russia now sending military forces into Lebanon. Now they say they're only sending about 300 advisors and engineers and special forces at first. But, it's been bedrock foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy for 60 years to keep the Russians out of the Middle East. Once 300 go in, then more can go in. And how do you get the Russians out of Lebanon, off the borders of Israel, once they decide to be there? What if they decide that, well, we'll take over the bulk of the peacekeeping operations? We'll send in a division or two or three or more. Suddenly Russian forces begin massing on the border of Israel, and you're like, man, this would be right out of the book of Ezekiel. Well, we look at those things, and I can't tell you today that these prophecies are coming true right now. The trajectory is fascinating, but we have to be careful not to overreach. It'll happen when it happens, and then our job is to teach people. I feel like my job is to teach people about these prophecies, give them a way through Ezekiel option to get a sense of how it might play out, and an epicenter, sort of a nonfiction version of understanding how these things, what's coming and how they might play out. But let's not overreach. At the same time, just because we can't say for sure that they're going to happen in the next few years, we also can't rule out that they might happen in the next few years. And if they do, what the scriptures have given us is a storm warning. This is the National Weather Report saying Katrina is coming. And I don't want to be the mayor of New Orleans leaving the buses in the parking lot. I feel like, my job is to help do everything I can to reach the epicenter with the gospel message of Jesus Christ, and to mobilize believers in North America or wherever God takes us, whether it's the Philippines or wherever, and encourage people to get in the game, get in the mission of reaching Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, Russia, these nations that are so desperate for hope, so devoid of security, eternal security, to touch these countries with the love of Christ, to reach the epicenter with Christ's love. And that's what compels us. Because I don't want to see Jesus one day and have him say, Joel, I'm really glad that whole novel thing worked out. That's awesome. That's great, dude. But man, what part of the Great Commission, go ye therefore and make disciples of all nations, what part of that did you not understand, son? I mean, was it in Greek? All right, well, it was. But, Tyndale had all those translations. I don't know what the problem was. And I think that's really our task at this moment, that regardless of whether these particular prophecies are setting into motion right now or not, the nations of the epicenter are racked with violence and terror and apocalyptic thinking, and they're arming to the teeth. They're pursuing nuclear weapons. New alliances are forming, all of which is very dangerous. And the question is, are we going to do everything we possibly can to touch these people, these countries, these lives, even our enemies? Jesus said, love our enemies. We're going to touch them with the love of Christ. That's what compels me. And that's why I want to say thank you so much to each of you, because this is part of that force multiplier effect. It's one thing to sit in your office and type away on some little story or to do some research, but without a team of people who can drive that message and shape it and make it look as good as it does and move it as far and wide as it does, and to get people interested in it, there would be absolutely no way to have these doors be opening. So I do want to take a few minutes, if there is a few minutes, for questions, but mostly my desire this morning is to thank you each individually for what you're doing. And not just for me. You're doing this, you've been doing it for so many other people, and you'll be doing it for so many others. And but I want you to know how my wife and my boys and I are grateful. I think we've got 4 boys, Caleb, Jacob, Jonah, and Noah. We had 3, and then we thought, Jesus said in Matthew 24 that he wasn't coming back again until the days of Noah. So we thought, if we're holding him back in any way, man, but he's here. He's on the scene. And Noah's already been to Israel. We're good to go. So, but they pray for me every day, but they also pray for you, thanking God for you and how we partner together to advance the gospel. So let me stop there. and see if you guys have any questions this morning. I appreciate it.
What was the last book in the Bible?
Proverbs, Revelation, which you've built a wonderful ministry around. It's funny, that's the question that was asked that I got so badly wrong back then, you know. But there's growth for all of us, right? Yes, sir.
What book would you read first of the various books?
Oh, I can't read any of them anymore. I'm so sick of them. No, no. Oh, yeah. Well, if you wanted to read the novel series, I'd probably start right at the beginning, The Last Jihad. But, you know, I try to write each of the novels so that a person could enter at any point, and if they you know, got into it, then you could double back. And I meet a lot of people who've read them out of order. But, yeah, I mean, I think that trajectory works. And, of course, or the other way is to read Epicenter, and then because that gives the backstory of how I shifted from politics and working for Netanyahu and Sharansky and came to believe that a kamikaze attack might be coming and that might lead to a war with Iraq, and how I wrote Last Jihad and what prophecies I was, you know, but Saddam is not in the scriptures, obviously, but as I looked at Ezekiel 38 and 39, Iraq isn't part of the coalition to attack Israel. And I thought, well, if Iraq isn't there, it isn't in the coalition, then Saddam is not there. Well, how come Saddam's not there? Well, I can't write a book about this coalition attacking Israel until I get rid of Saddam fictionally. And that's what set into motion the Last Jihad. So Epicenter describes that, and also what I think is coming based on scriptures, based on exclusive interviews with people in the region, leaders in the region. And so if you read that, then you'd have a little bit of a flavor of each of the books, a sense of why they've, what has come true in them, and then you could double back. So, but thank you for asking. I saw another hand, but now they've, oh, yes, okay. There and then. Oh, well, not Arabic, although I'm open, and not Farsi. I'd be less open, but if the Lord wanted to do that. No, but it's being translated into Hebrew right now. It has been translated into Russian, and that's being finalized, proof checked right now. And we are really praying about launching the Ezekiel option into Hebrew, Russian, and English in Israel next year. You can imagine with the rise of Iran as a force, as a threat to Israel, saying they're going to, you know, at page 358 of the Ezekiel option, you may know, one of my fictional Islamic characters says, we're going to wipe Israel off the map. 5 months after the book came out, Ahmed Genocide, said, we're going to wipe Israel off the map. So there's a lot of leaders there that are excited about the book and want it to be there. Now we're having a real challenge figuring out how to publish and distribute it there. Translating, printing, not the problem. Getting distribution, there really hasn't been an evangelical Christian novel published in Israel ever, so that I'm aware of. I mean, maybe there may be some small, you know, there may be something. We're just not. We've done a lot of research. We haven't found it yet. So that is a challenge, and we're looking at how to do that. And there may be a way. One of the things we'll be talking about today, I hope, here internally. But this is my prayer, because I think people are going to be increasingly horrified by what's coming, and they're going to be looking for answers. And I think this is a book that might be effective. So I appreciate the question. Yeah, she asked, and then I'll. You know, well, about the Iraqi elections, will democracy stick? You know, in the Copper Scroll, one of the characters says, "Are we making Iraq safe for democracy or safe for the Antichrist?" You know, and I think it's both, to be candid. We know it's going to get a lot worse in Iraq. It's going to be the epicenter of evil. And so part of us, we could say, well, why do we want to help do anything if the Antichrist is just going to take over, build Babylon, and run the world from there? But I think it's the same answer as why did we need to oppose and then bring down the evil empire, knowing that Ezekiel 38 says a dictator will rise in Russia that will be far worse than a Stalin or a whomever before. And I think the answer is because you want to create as long a window of time and opportunity that you can for people in Russia and the former Soviet republics and in Iraq to hear the gospel, to live free, to be able to hook up satellite television and get the gospel off their satellite, or listen to radio, or read papers, or go on the internet, to go to visit churches. And in Epicenter, I describe an entire chapter of how many Muslims are coming to faith in Jesus Christ right now. It's record numbers. And I interview pastors in Iraq and from Iran and Sudan. It's extraordinary what's happening. And therefore, from the perspective of the church, this is the greatest moment of openness we've ever seen in the Middle East, and it's coming at a high price. But I personally believe that the military battles that we're seeing in the Middle East right now, and the terrorism and the spasms of violence, are a physical manifestation of a spiritual battle that's going on underneath. There's a battle for the soul of the Muslim people. Jesus is going after the Muslim people, and he's winning them through dreams, through visions, through satellite, through radio, through the internet, through Bible distribution, through missionaries, but mostly through national believers. It's the most extraordinary wave of Muslims coming to Christ in history. And therefore, the price is high, but I think, for every moment that we can keep the door open, forced open, not to force people to come to Christ, but force the radical Muslims at bay to give people at least the freedom to listen, is so critical. And we need to keep praying for the work that God is doing there. Mark.
After that, my question sounds a little mundane. Your first two books were published initially by Tor, which is a big science fiction publishing company. How did that come about?
Well, they're the ones that picked it up. When I first wrote Last Jihad, I was finishing it on the morning of 9/11, and I thought, well, there's nothing you can do with a book that opens with a kamikaze attack against the United States when it now has just happened. It's not entertaining anymore. But when the State of the Union address happened in 2002, and President Bush talked about the axis of evil and said the next great threat we may face is from Iraq over terrorism and weapons of mass destruction, since that's where Last Jihad led to, Scott Miller called me and said, all right, first of all, he said, do you work for the CIA? And I said, no. He said, sure, that's what you'd have to say if you did work for the CIA and you just couldn't tell me. I said, really, Scott, I don't know. I don't. He goes, well, I think the dynamic has just changed. I think people are going to be interested in it. And you're right, Tor is really known for science fiction. It was published, officially it was under the Forge imprint, which is a little bit more, mainstream thriller, but I'm not, it's a marginal difference. But I'm grateful. I was grateful for anybody picking it up at the time, and they did a great job with it, but they didn't see the opportunity to move both through the ABA and the CBA markets. They couldn't conceptualize how to do both, and we really wanted to do both. I thought there was, because my target audience, I would say, is somebody who might spend a Sunday morning poking around in Barnes & Noble or in Walmart or in Costco, not people who are at the local Bible church. But the core audience, I think, are evangelicals who get excited about these books and start talking about them and sharing them. And that's why, and I will just add this, that I told Scott Miller, my agent, I said, so he said, well, let's try and send it to some Christian publishers, see if they're interested. I said, that's fine, but don't send it to Tyndale. And he said, well, why not? They do the biggest. I said, yeah, but because they've got a warehouse full of manuscripts that they're like, everybody and their mother wants to write apocalyptic fiction. There's no way they're going to have any interest in one more. He said, well, we should send it to him. I said, fine, send it to him, but I'm just telling you, it ain't going to happen. So that whole Nostradamus thing, let me just disabuse you of that notion. But I'm grateful to be here because you guys really have, Tyndale is so, is amazing, I would say, historic in that respect, to be able to do both channels this effectively, and that if you just did CBA well, Dayenu, but to be able to operate in ABA and CBA, and this my book tours are just intertwining. 1 minute I'm on Moody, and the next minute I'm talking to the Washington Times, and the next minute we're on CNN, and the next minute we're at 700 Club, and it just kind of keeps going like that so seamlessly. And I think a large part of that is Tyndale being able to operate that way so effectively. I'm afraid of overstaying my welcome, so I don't know how. One more? Okay, well, I think I saw you, yeah. Well, which of the headlines is most imminent from the book Epicenter? Well, I think the challenge of that is it's not what was actually happening in the world, but what the media would see in order to do a headline. In other words, one of the headlines in the book is Russia joins axis of evil. Well, in my view, this has happened. It just hasn't been reported yet. I mean, Russia has signed a $1 billion arms deal with Iran. They did that last December to sell missiles and high-tech weaponry to Iran. We're talking about the worst radical Islamic terrorist state on the face of the planet. This is not sort of a neutral thing. This is selling $1 billion worth of arms to our worst enemy, a country that says we're going to wipe Israel off the map. And by the way, in the same speech, Ahmadinejad said that urged the Muslim world to envision a world without the United States. And he said, is this possible? And he said, yes, when our holy hatred strikes like a wave. Russia is building the nuclear facilities that we're so worried about in Iran. They've trained over 1,000 Iranian nuclear scientists. They're running political interference for Iran at the United Nations to keep the United States and the West from putting sanctions, effective sanctions on Iran. Russia has formed a military alliance, an economic alliance, a political alliance with the axis of evil. And that's just one country. It has just not been recognized yet. So to me, that was an easy call. That's a future headline. It's happened. It's just no reporter seems to be able to see it. And I got to say, and maybe this is a good way to end, you really got to be praying for Americans to understand what a threat this new Hitler poses in the case of Ahmadinejad. Because, I mean, I was just describing to you a little bit, and in Epicenter, I describe in detail and endnote it all, the eschatology, the Islamic eschatology that is driving Ahmadinejad. But you will search in vain in the mainstream media to find this stuff. Mike Wallace does an exclusive interview with Ahmadinejad, never asks him about his religious beliefs. Brian Williams on NBC's Nightly News, exclusive interview, hour-long, never asks about Ahmadinejad's religious beliefs that are driving him. Anderson Cooper, CNN, exclusive interview, never asks. Time Magazine, cover story, never mentions the fact that this guy believes that the end of the world is approaching and it's his mission to bring it about. You know, it's as though Ahmadinejad is Nicole Kidman and everyone's bewitched. I mean, they're just mesmerized by this guy, and it would be funny if it wasn't unnerving that there's a blindness, I think, to evil. And that's the central point, which I will conclude on before they open up the baptismal that they really call the trap door, which in Epicenter, which is to misunderstand the nature and threat of evil is to risk being blindsided by it. We were blindsided by Pearl Harbor. We were blindsided by World War II, the rise of Hitler, Auschwitz, blindsided by 9/11. And the question history is going to ask us, are we going to be blindsided by an Iranian nuclear attack that is being described and planned for, and yet too many Americans, including in our media, including in our government, either can't see or won't take action on. And I think 2007 is the decision year. One way or the other, a massive, horrifying, apocalyptic war is coming in the Middle East in the next few years. And either Iran's going to launch it at us, or we're going to take some form of action to slow them down or stop them. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I think next year is the year that decision will get made. But there is hope. God is moving in the Middle East and drawing people to himself, and that's what keeps us moving every single day. Thanks. God bless you guys. Thank you so much.